Hello and welcome to the Retro Hour podcast, episode number 80. Your weekly dose of retro gaming and technology news with me, Dan Wood.
And me, Ravi Abbott.
And me, Joe Fox.
Fueled on caffeine today.
Fueled on caffeine and pure determination, as I am still recovering from a weekend in Blackpool on top of a lovely chest infection, courtesy of you two.
we haven't been kissing, by the way.
Well, I don't know what you two guys did later. It was a bit of a lively weekend though, wasn't it, boys?
Yeah, it was wicked.
Yeah, it was really good.
So obviously we were at Play Expo in Blackpool, the huge event that last weekend, we were actually there on stage on the Saturday. We got there nice and early. Bearing in mind, I always do this thing. I always think, right, I'm going to get all my work done the night before, go to bed about 9 o'clock, set my alarm for 5:30, that's it, I'll be fresh next day. Went to bed about 3:30 in the morning in the end.
Yeah, I was working till really late as well, so I had about 3 hours sleep. But we rocked it, Dan. We had like 150 or 30 people in for the big Amiga talk, and the atmosphere was amazing.
Sorry, was that 150 people or 30?
I'm not sure. I didn't have time to count.
Yeah. No, it looked very busy.
Yeah, we did 3 separate talks, and one of them actually is going to be broadcast on today's show. Now, we were chatting to former Ocean Software director Gary Bracey. Now, this guy is obviously widely regarded as a guy who turned around the fortunes of Ocean Software. We all know those massive movie licenses, RoboCop, Batman that Ocean had back in the day. And I've got to say, massive thank you to the guys at Retro on Limb who filmed it and actually recorded the audio for us today. Now, little disclaimer, this was a live audience in front of a crowd. It's not our usual studio sound that you'll be used to on the Retro Hour podcast.
Yeah. We had a little mess up with the audio as usual. Whenever we do anything live, we've always had a little mess up with the audio. But luckily, Retro and Limb came and saved us.
Now, bear in mind, you've been an audio engineer for how long, Ravi?
About 5-10 years.
I've been a broadcaster, worked in radio for like 15 years.
Oh, gee.
I don't think we've ever successfully recorded a live event yet, have we?
No. I think the only one was John Romero, and then we could hear him banging on the tables anyway.
So you'll have to excuse the quality's not, quite up to our usual standard, but when your ears get used to it, I think it is more than listenable, and especially when you hear the stories of Ocean Software, because there's some really good tales that were told there. We also had a little a world exclusive as well. We had David Pleasance, ex-Commodore, Gary Bracey and Mark Hale from System 3 all together on a little panel, and the audience Q&A was amazing.
Yeah, you don't usually get those 3 people together, and it was good because it was like 2 kind of rival companies with the computer system in the middle. Yeah. And the debate was just really fun, and everybody seemed to get on. That was the thing. You think, oh, System 3 there in Ocean, is there going to be a punch-up? But no, it was fantastic.
And I bought myself a Sega 32X.
Yeah, you did. I like to think that I had something to do with that. They were doing the panels, and I was off gaming with other friends, and Dan's been after a 32X, for about 3-4 years now? And I saw one, and I was just like, oh my God, text Dan, message him, ring him, anything. Went him and got him, and you got an absolute steal on it. I'll use the word steal in the end.
Because it was meant to be 95 quid, and it didn't come with the AV cables. So the guy said, you were looking on eBay for me, and you found a cable for like $3.99. He goes, I tell you what, I'll knock $3.99 off then. 75 quid.
Yeah.
And I'm like, this guy obviously doesn't do maths a lot well. So.
I was like, I don't know where he went to school, but brilliant.
Did you get anything nice, Joe?
I did actually. I ended up buying a lot of PlayStation and PS2 kind of stuff. Some wouldn't consider massively retro, whereas usually I kind of go for the 8-bit and 16-bit consoles. But
you are Mr. 16-bit, remember?
This is true, and I didn't actually buy a single 8-bit or 16-bit cartridge or anything from the expo. I ended up buying, I bought all the Onimushu games for PS2 because I've always just wanted to play them. Silent Hill 2 and 3, and a couple of other bits and bobs. But yeah, which was very odd for me, but enjoying them at the moment, which is good.
You got recognised quite a few times when we're out and about, and everyone's like, oh, you're Mr. 16-bit, Joe.
Yeah, and I was just there like, how do you know me? And it's like, oh, I've been on your Facebook. And I'm like, really?
It's Handsome Joe.
Oh, yeah.
and Ravi had some interesting purchases.
Yeah, I just bought like soft toys and plushies. So I had a really cool lemming that I put on Instagram. I didn't know this, right? I bought this lemming and I thought, oh, this is cool. And I took it home and I squeezed it. And it went, oh no!
That's brilliant.
It does all the voices.
That's brilliant. Well, funny enough, you didn't actually get that lemming from the expo, did you?
No, that was this little gaming store, Eclipse, that we ended up walking down to.
So it was interesting. So we were all really hungover, just to paint the picture. about 11, 12 o'clock in the morning, all very, very hungover, other than Ravi, of course. Ravi's always, spring chicken in the morning. And he's like, oh, I've seen this game shop. It's about an 18-minute walk away from the town centre. Thinking, oh, okay, that's 18 minutes away. 40 minutes later, me being very, very pessimistic, I was like, it's a Sunday, Ravi, it's not going to be open. I can't believe you've made us do this. And it was a really, really good little find, wasn't
the boy delivered.
The boy delivered.
Yeah, it was a blooming good shop, so I recommend that, because I think they also had a store at Play Expo, so they had half their stock there and half at the shop as well.
What were they called again?
Eclipse.
Eclipse. That was it.
Blackpool,
Eclipse Gaming in Blackpool.
If you're in that area, definitely. You put a link on our Facebook, so people want to find their page. They even did an offer, didn't they, where you get $5 off any game over a tenner?
Any game over a tenner, $5 off, which I thought was really good because it was all really reasonably priced anyway. Mm-hmm. So then I didn't even know that. He just said, "Oh, if you like the page, you get $5 off," and I thought, "Wow, that's fantastic!"
Joe's borrowing everyone else's phone. Look, I've liked the page again. So it was a great weekend in Blackpool, and we are going to bring you a talk with Gary Bracey from Ocean Software on the Retro Hour podcast in around 20 minutes from now. Now, before we get into that, obviously we do the show week in, week out. We're a multi-platform show. We cover Sega, we cover Commodore, we cover Sinclair, Amstrad, Nintendo, anything that's retro, we cover on this show.
Virtual Boy.
We haven't actually done a Virtual Boy special yet, but
There you go, it's been mentioned.
Have you ever used
That's what I want next time from a show.
Have you ever used a Virtual Boy?
Yeah, I got a migraine after about a minute, I think. But we couldn't do the show week in, week out without your very generous support. Now, we want to say a massive thank you to people who this week have found it in their hearts to make a donation into the Retro Hour Hall of Fame. Now, we have this on our website, a little tip jar. If you enjoy this show, just want to put a couple of quid, couple of dollars, couple of euros into the pot to help us pay for the cost of running it. We really appreciate that. Obviously, completely optional. But this week, we want to say a huge thank you to Magnus Esbjörna,
Adam Hind,
Billy Rooney,
and Christopher Foles, who all made donations to the Retro Hour podcast this week. You can do the same by heading to our website, theretrohour.com. Little PayPal on there. Fill in your email or donate via Bitcoin. Now, speaking of listeners getting in touch, we thought we'd try something last week. Do you remember?
Yeah, we did like an appeal, and it was it's because we got this one video of a guy listening to the Retro Hour next to a beautiful lake after setting up a sauna. So we were like, we want to hear about Retro Hour listeners and where they listen to us, how they consume us. And we got some really nice letters through.
I've actually done, to make this like proper old-style radio, I've actually printed the letters out as well.
Oh, physical paper, it's not digital.
Just feels so much more proper.
I should have done it on the carbon paper.
It's really weird because I work in a paperless office, like where we're not meant to have paper. So for me, it's just like, what is this?
You should have done a dot matrix. That would have been good.
So we have got an email address if you ever want to get in touch and, maybe ask any questions. Let us know where you listen to the Retro Hour podcast, say hello, anything like that. You can email show@theretrohour.com. The idea is we're going to read one or two out, like, the start of every show. We did get quite a few this week, actually. Now, I've picked out a few here. We've got to say a massive hello to Amiga Bill Winters.
Oh, from the Guru Meditation.
Good friend of ours. He says, what up, boys? The Retro Hour podcast rules. Heard your request for photos or videos of where folks listen to you. And he sent us a picture of where he normally listens to the Retro Hour podcast on the banks of the Hudson River in Terrytown in New York.
It looks amazing. This to me looks like an advertising shot. And the most impressive thing about it is he's put it through an Amiga Paint program.
Yeah.
And it still looks really good quality.
For me, it's just really depressing that he's just in such a better place than us. We're in the UK and he's in New York. We're just like, oh, great.
So to describe this picture, Bill's there. You can see his shoes. He's just kind of there, the sun rising or setting, I imagine. This is there at like 5 a.m, going down over the mountains. He's holding the Retro Hour podcast up on his phone. And it just looks so tranquil, doesn't it? And here we are in like dull, grey, wet Nottingham on a Wednesday evening.
Well, virtually we're in America. There you go.
But it's awesome. I mean, Bill, if you haven't checked him out before, he's at the Guru Meditation on YouTube, Amiga Bill on Twitch as well. He's actually going to be doing a little tutorial on how he made this on the Amiga, this picture. So
that's amazing because Bill's stuff that, he produces it is just the highest quality. It's fantastic.
So good to know you listen there, Bill. Looks amazing.
Cheers.
Dave/hologram, that's his handle, has been in touch. He goes, hey guys, I love to listen to the Retro Hour podcast when I'm driving or better yet, hiking in the woods. I'm so happy I found your podcast. I grew up on the Commodore 64, but the cassette player wasn't available, so he typed in all his games from magazines and then lost them when he turned the computer off.
Oh,
but in the later days, he ran a elite bulletin board called America's Most Wanted. Some dodgy wares on that one.
So do you reckon he downloads it before he goes for a walk in the woods because he might lose, streaming connection or something. Loses 3G.
Nice to hear from you, though, Dave. Thank you for getting in touch. And finally this week, Lewis Clark, he goes, "Hey, guys, Lewis here from SegaDriven.com. Want to drop you a little letter and say I'm a big fan of the show. He listens on Overcast on iOS, which you've mentioned before. Good podcast app. Recently, he found an Amiga 500 in his parents' loft. Now, our friend Alex actually did the same recently. He found an Amiga in his what's something going on with, Amigas in parents'
like,
attic?
there's an Amiga fairy just planting them in people's, not in your attic, but in your parents' attic.
And I did actually tell Alex this over the weekend, that we did find one disc with his Amiga. Because it wasn't his, it was his granddad's Amiga, wasn't it?
No, it was his stepdad's
Okay.
Amiga.
Far removed then.
Yeah.
Well, there was a disc with it, and it just said on the label, one disc with this Amiga 500, Stag.
Yeah.
Say no more.
We'll leave it there.
Google it if you don't know what we're talking about. Lewis, however, he wants to use this Amiga for completely other purposes, I imagine. He said, I found this Amiga 500. He wants to expand it to 1 megabyte in memory so he can play games. Is there any way he can do that easily, or should he emulate?
For the 500.
To get trapdoor thing?
Yeah,
off
you can
eBay?
get a little trapdoor expansion, the original ones.
Yeah. Go to Amiga Kit. They've probably got one, or just check eBay. You want 512k RAM expansion?
And they've got those little sideboards as well that you can get that even take you up to 8 megabytes.
Yeah.
I was just like, 8 megs of power. Good one.
I remember when 1 meg was like, wow. So thank you so much for all your emails, guys. Really appreciate it. And if you want to get in touch this week for a mention on next week's show@theretrohour.com. Now let's get into the news, and we'll start with something a little bit sad.
Yeah, retrocomputingnews.com, who have followed us for quite a while and has been run by the really nice Stuart Williams. I'm afraid he's going to have to finish it because of stuff coming up in personal life and commitments. But cheers for all your work. And if you want to check it out, he's going to leave all the articles up and leave all the Facebook page up and everything so people can use it as a resource. So that's retrocomputingnews.com.
That's really good when they do that, though, because there's nothing worse than a website just finishing and then it goes, and then you remember, I want to read that article again, especially something that's been going for a long time.
Yeah. You know, some people, when they leave stuff, they delete everything, and it's just like, don't do that, because people can use it many years in the future.
Yeah, and hopefully, maybe at some point you might come back and continue it. So,
yeah, who knows? And, if you feel like you might be able to help Stuart and assist him or something, maybe check him out and give him a contact.
Yeah, best of luck, Stuart. Now, obviously, this one's been everywhere over the last week. I'm sure you've seen it. The Atari box has been unveiled.
What is it? No, I know what it is.
With Atari.
I know what it is. I know about it. A friend of mine at work and at the gym, he keeps on going on about it. But I don't know whether it's like a clone console like the SNES and NES Mini, or all these like Mega Drive Minis, etc. Or is it actually a brand new platform to play games on? Which I doubt. Can you tell me?
Well, no one actually knows.
Okay.
They haven't unveiled officially at this point when we're recording the show. All they did is, we talked about it. Was it last week or the week before? They released a video just kind of showing it up close, and it actually looks, now they've put out some proper images that show the actual console. It looks a lot slicker than I thought it did in that video. Because everyone was like, it's wood grain, it's old-fashioned. But actually, it's actually quite sleek plastic by the looks of it. And you've got the Atari logo that kind of glows through.
It's a really nice design. It's kind of got the slopes on it. But I've heard...
It really reminds me of like Space Odyssey or something, what they think the future looked like in the 70s.
Yeah, it's got the wood grain, as well. But I heard that it was for new games, but also the old classics, so remakes as well. So it will kind of cover that area, and I suspect it will be some kind of Android device inside.
See, then, you're looking at the specs here, and this kind of leads to, you've probably been right there. There's a black and red version and a wood version of it, and they show the ports on the back as well. You've got HDMI, 4 USB ports, Ethernet on the back, what looks like a headphone jack, but also an SD card slot as well.
Okay.
I think if it was like, you don't normally get SD card, apart from the Wii U or the Switch. You don't normally get those in mainstream consoles, only really your Android kind of boxes kind of things.
Yeah.
So, this could be, some people are suggesting maybe it's going to be like a streaming box, like a Steam box kind of thing.
That'd be interesting.
If it's Android, it's essentially going to be like an Ouya.
Yeah, that was my main concern. I was like, are they going to put all this kind of like money and resource into it and effort into it just for it to kind of flop? But I think with it having the Atari name to it and it being by Atari, I think we're going to really see quite a backing to it. People are actually going to be interested in it, especially, the older gamers and stuff like that are really going to be like, oh, wow, like that really is a flashback kind of thing. So hopefully
I think it'll catch the mainstream,
Yeah.
Like the way that it's spreading already, the amount
Well,
of news.
this is like I say, like, I've got a mate at work who's mentioning it, and it's like he's never been one to like mention the Atari before. He's never been one to mention like old games, retro games, or anything. As far as he's ever really gone back is PS2, and that's not something he has now. He doesn't even have a PlayStation 3, or he's just got his PC and his PS4. But he's even going on about it. He's like, wow, have you seen this? This could be like a new mainstream console kind of thing. And I'm like, wow, for him to know about it, it's actually got quite a bit of oomph behind it.
The most important thing, though, is obviously software, isn't it? Because, I remember that Ouya got a hell of a lot of hype. And at one point, that was the biggest, funded Kickstarter in history, the Ouya. Yeah. And then, obviously, it came out and everyone bought one, including me. You sat there and you're like, I'm just playing phone games on my telly. There needs to be decent software there. The NVIDIA Shield is a bit more kind of in that range. It depends who's going to develop for it. And they have been advertising for software developers for this platform.
Oh, have they?
But that might just be for the user interface. You don't really know. So,
well, I think a big clue in it is that the fact that it has an Ethernet port in there, because it's not going to be stuck with classic games. Why would they bother putting an Ethernet port in there? It's going to have some kind of online capability, or maybe an app store or something like that.
Well, if it's got Ethernet, you'd imagine, 'cause I remember that Ouya didn't have Ethernet from what I remember. I think it was just Wi-Fi. I may be wrong there, actually, but you'd imagine on Ethernet, they're looking at maybe games that are going to require quite good latency, so maybe more powerful games. But, it's interesting seeing the Atari name coming back. And I said to Rav, we were talking on Facebook about it last week. We're like, oh, it's probably just going to be an Android box. And I'm like, but I want one. He's like, yeah, me too.
Yeah, that's it.
This is the thing, like, when the SNES Mini came out, was announced, I was like, what a rip-off. I've got most of these games. Add to cart.
Yeah. In disgust.
Yeah.
So, yeah. We'll keep an eye on the Atari box. Interesting to see the Atari brand back there. Something else that caught our interest this week, Super Mario Maker 64.
Yeah, this is a really nice looking kind of take on Mario Maker, but for the N64, and it's been done. I think it's in Project 64, which is an emulator. It's very much like if you ever played Tony Hawk's and they had the level editors. It's kind of like that.
Yeah, no, that's what kind of reminded me of as well. Yeah, Tony Hawk's Pro Skater with the level editors. For me, I would love to see something like this on the Switch. Like, I think it's got some real potential. Whether Nintendo do it, doubtful. When do they do what we actually demand? But I think it looks really good. But it would be really nice to see it on the Switch in kind of really smoothed over graphics. Just kind of looking a lot nicer in that HD. Dan's just really distracting us right now.
I'm not dancing my chair to the Mario music. We should do the whole show over this.
We should just do it all the time.
Yeah, but because I've got Mario Maker on the Wii U, and it is loads of fun. But obviously, being able to do it with a game that you know inside out and get new levels and all that.
Well, that's 2D as well. This is three-dimensional.
This is more advanced.
My point is Mario Maker obviously kind of focuses on your Nintendo and your SNES, and they look really nice. The graphics look really nice and vamped up, whereas this kind of demo of Mario Maker 64 doesn't. So it would be really nice to see Nintendo actually do it themselves and really see those really polished, nice, clean graphics.
Totally, and maybe they could have other 3D titles in there, because in Mario Maker you can have the old NES games and mix them in with the new ones, and that would be cool.
I'm sure that Mario Maker's got to be a title that they put on the Switch, because the Switch has got a really good touchscreen, actually. Yeah. It's like the Wii U, it was not a multi-touch, it was a capacitive one, I believe, so you need the stylus for it, which for that game, actually using a stylus was probably quite good. But, the Switch has got more like, an iPhone kind of screen. Yeah, so you can do it with your finger quite accurately. So imagine, if they want to get that game to a bigger platform, and it was one of the most highly praised Wii U games.
Well, yeah, and it was successful on the 3DS as well, so I would imagine it'd be quite successful on the Switch. Yeah. But then, also with that argument, there's only so many games, you can port.
I reckon they'll put all of them. All the big Wii U games.
Probably.
I always forget to actually press the buttons on my Wii U. I look at the controller And I'm like, oh, and I forget that it's touchscreen.
Yeah.
You know, because you're used to the joysticks. and
Yeah,
stuff.
absolutely.
Yeah, it's not the nicest touchscreen to use
No.
on the Wii U, is it? But yeah, that was a really cool demo. At the moment, it only runs on the emulator, they're saying, but they're trying to get it working on an EverDrive, so you can play it on actual hardware, which would be very, very cool.
Well, more Mario news as well.
It's crazy, this one.
Yeah, we've got a Batman group who are a massive kind of hacking group that have been doing some great stuff for the Amstrad CPC.
Are they the guys that ported Pinball Dreams to the Amstrad?
Yeah, and they also did some great Amiga demos back in the days. They're really talented coders. And they've actually created really smooth scrolling on the CPC for a Mario clone that they've made.
They put this video on Twitter, and I'll put this in the show notes at theretrohour.com. Looking at that, I mean, it actually looks smoother than a NES.
Yeah, they found it.
You not think?
Nah. Maybe, I don't know. Let me play it.
Oh, you haven't watched it yet? You're just disagreeing.
No, I played it earlier on. I'm playing it again.
It's like,
You got to flick it, 'cause it's on a CRT.
Oh, yeah, I don't know.
Maybe a few drop frames. I think that's really smooth.
they're basically saying they've found a new kind of routine on how to do it, and instead of using byte precision, they're using byte precision instead of pixel precision for scrolling, and that's seeming to speed it up. So they might be able to implement this in new releases that are coming out for the Amstrad, or they might be able to put it in older games and speed them up a bit.
I mean, it's all, well and good, but, the NES has been, scrolling for 34 years.
Now, the Amstrad's only been doing it a week. Give it a chance.
But this really interests me in the Amstrad because, it's like 50 FPS as well.
Yeah.
And that machine, I think it was powerful, but people are only starting to discover the kind of things you can do with it.
Well, the Amstrad, it got loads of Spectrum ports.
Yeah.
Because people were developers were lazy. So really back in the day, people thought it was just as powerful as a Spectrum, and then you see stuff like this, and it's like, it was really underutilized. Really.
Yeah, they just thought it was Alan Sugar's, bodged together thing. But it seems to be really good.
Now, speaking of 8-bit platforms, final story this week. You know what? I think the Commodore 64 is becoming the new Spectrum. You know what I mean by that?
No,
all
not at all.
Yes, I agree. I have no idea what you're on about. Yeah.
Now, do you remember a couple of years ago, you would see, remakes of the Spectrum absolutely everywhere?
Yeah, absolutely. Like every expo you'd go to a couple of years ago, there'd be one dealer, one seller, just selling all these different, Spectrum bits, and it just kind of really, a proper resurgence about 3-4 years ago.
And even the ZX Spectrum Next, that's kind of just the Kickstarter's finished. That's
And
just
they had
about
the
it.
Vegas and all of this kind of stuff,
Well, the Commodore 64 now looks like it's getting a few remakes as well. Now, obviously, there's a one that Jerry Ellsworth.
Yeah, the Commodore 1, which was years ago, and it was kind of she always said that she wanted to have her Commodore 64 doing a lot more things and, be a lot more impressive. So she kind of made a new one herself from scratch, yeah.
And also, we had, Jens from Individual Computers. He's making the Commodore 64 Reloaded.
Yeah, and he's got the Commodore name as well, so that will be all officially branded.
Now, this one isn't an official Commodore product, but we have yet another Commodore 64 remake. This one is called the C64 Ultimate.
Yeah, this looks quite cool. I hear you've been talking with them, Dan.
Yeah, well, Martin Wieland, who, listens to our show, we talk to him quite a lot. He actually knows Gideon, who's the guy behind this, and hopefully we're going to have Gideon on the show in the next couple of weeks to talk about this. But essentially, he's made a new Commodore 64 motherboard that actually does fit in the original case.
Yeah.
However, it's like, you look at the size of it compared to the original C64 motherboard, it's like, it's tiny, isn't it? It's a little thin strip, essentially.
It's a lot smaller. It's just as if it's just going to fit nicely at the back of it.
Yeah.
And then it's just got that little strip down on the right side.
You'd imagine it's going to be a lot more, cooler than the old one, man, as well. So, but apparently it's meant to be, because it's got all the same ports and that, work with a lot of the original peripherals. Everything should work with it. You can plug in your old disk drives and all that, and apparently they'll work just fine. So essentially, it's there to replace broken boards, or if you want to build a machine that's going to last you another 30 years.
Well, from looking at the picture of the prototype here, you've actually got some really cool stuff. You've got HDMI out.
Yeah.
You've got the real-time clock is a battery, so it's not going to leak everywhere. Mm-hmm. You've also got an SD card going in there, and you've got GPIO ports, so you may be able to control extra stuff internally from it and use the old Commodore kind of Wi-Fi kits and all the new add-ons at the back that are coming through.
Well, it essentially replaces a lot of like the expansion port things, like the SD card adapters and that kind of the SD, to IECs and those kind of things. Essentially, they're all on board with this. So
Yeah.
And he's hoping it's going to be out before the end of this year. So again, and I heard a little rumor over the weekend that there may be another Commodore 64 project in the works by some rather high-profile people that I'm not allowed to talk about just yet.
Oh.
I was literally I was like, who? I think I know anyway.
Could just be a rumour.
Just be a rumour.
But yeah, by the sounds of it, what happened to the Specky a couple of years ago, you're about to get a lot of C64s remade over the next year or so.
Oh, exciting. Maybe I should get a C64 now.
Yeah, you've been saying that for a while, haven't you?
Yeah,
You've got no excuse now.
I need to dip my toe into the water.
So thank you so much for checking out episode number 80 of the Retro Hour podcast. Can't believe we made the big 80 already.
It's crazy.
It's going to have a cake or something to celebrate.
Yeah,
celebrate 100.
Now, the show will be out again next Friday, of course, available from all of your favourite podcast clients. And if you do want to get in touch and let us know how you listen, or just say hello, maybe you've got something you want to promote, anything like that, drop us an email, show@theretrohour.com. Now, if you were a Commodore 64 fan, you are going to love this week's show. We're catching up with Gary Bracey, the former Ocean Software director, who used to, get all those licensed games, stuff like RoboCop and Batman, and really was a guy who changed a fortune for Ocean Software and made them into the massive company that they were. Recorded live at Play Expo in Blackpool last weekend, thanks to our very good friends at Retro Unlim. We'll put a link to them in our show notes this week as well. They've got a really good website. Have you checked that out?
Yeah, it's really good. And their YouTube channel's nice, so you can also see a video version of this on there.
Yeah, well, I'll get it on my YouTube channel this weekend, thanks to them as well. So thank you very much for checking out the show, guys. We'll see you next week.
See you next week.
You're listening to the Retro Hour podcast, and it is time to welcome our very special guest, recorded live at Play Expo in Blackpool by our very good friends at Retro Unlim. You can check them out at retrounlim.com. I'll put that in this week's show notes on our website. The amazing Gary Bracey from Ocean Software, the man who was responsible for some of the biggest licensed video games in history, joined me and Ravi in front of a live audience. And here it is. Enjoy. Now, this is a question we always like to start with to give you a little bit of background. But what was your first ever computer experience then? When did it all begin?
Well, it was in the days before computer porn, so my experience was a little bit disappointing.
Dark ages.
I guess the first real... I had an Acorn Atom with a floating point on, so I was very lucky. But my first real experience was the Spectrum, I guess. And I got the box where you can get the, what was it, teletext type thing, Prestel, wasn't it? So that was online as well. And that sort of got me into it, and I thought, yeah, this is what I want to do.
Did you always kind of want to work with technology, or did you have other ambitions?
I had ambitions. I had no idea what I wanted to do. I worked in retail, I worked at Littlewoods chain stores, management, and getting into computer games sort of changed my life, and I thought, well, this could be an interesting direction career-wise. So I bought a Spectrum the day the Spectrum came out, and I rented some shelves in a local video library and bought a few games from a distributor and thought, I'll start a retail operation. And within a year, it did pretty well. Within a year, I'd made enough money to open up my own short store in a place called Allerton Road in Liverpool, which was the first computer shop in Liverpool. And that sort of got me on my way. The shop was called Blue Chip, very imaginative. And it was great. And I was dealing with people who were really into games. It was in the very, very early days. And then about 2 years into it, I wasn't really cut out to be a shopkeeper. And John Woods, who was a mate, and he relatively recently started a company called Spectrum Games, which had turned into Ocean Games, I think it was then, Ocean Games. And he asked me if I had any experience with games, and I said, yes, I sell them. I think I know what people like. And he asked me if I wanted to help him oversee the game production of the company, which was doing quite well at the time. They'd done a few successful games. So I had no grasp of programming. I can't draw. I'm not an artist, but I think I had a feel of what people liked to play because I sold to them every day. And that's what really kicked it off. So I joined Ocean, and I think I found my niche.
That was in 1985 when you joined Ocean.
Yeah, around about then.
And that must have been quite an interesting time because, obviously before that we had the fall of Imagine Software as well. That obviously was like a huge story in the industry then. I mean, did that kind of affect Ocean? Obviously, a lot of their games kind of came out of that purchase, didn't it?
Yeah, well, they bought the brand. I mean, I knew all the Imagine boys. I used to, we socialised a lot because the hub of the UK games industry at the time was really Liverpool and Manchester. And in Liverpool, you had Bugby, you had Imagine, Software Projects, and Odin, which became Thor, which became Odin, and quite a few of them. So it was quite a big industry in the northwest there. So I knew quite a few people there. And when Imagine went, which was sad, Ocean acquired the brand and decided to publish their coin-op games, their coin-op conversions under the Imagine label.
Well, weren't you always been a kind of movie fan as well?
Big star. Yeah. In fact, I always thought if I hadn't have done this, if all opportunities had been open, I would have loved to have gone to film directing. That was my dream. But instead, I was directing games, which is close enough, I guess. But I love movies, and when I started getting into the Ocean licensing side, after the early successes of a few games, particularly Top Gun, the movie companies started to realise that this video game hoo-ha could actually be quite lucrative because they started seeing royalty checks which they'd never seen before. They'd license the game for X $1,000s and wouldn't expect anything more from it. But all of a sudden, some of these games started to sell quite a few, and they started to get royalty checks in, and they started to take it really seriously. So, and at the time, I guess Ocean were the largest active company in movie licenses. So they started sending us scripts, and I think I was the only one who wanted to read the script. I would devour these things. I read all the scripts, and I actually still kept a few. They're all at home. And so I was looking at the scripts and sort of saying, yeah, there's potential there. No, that's not suitable. They actually sent us, I swear to God, they sent us Rain Man. Was perfect fodder for a video game. Count how many matches on the floor. So that's what sort of sparked that off, and of course I got this sort of B-movie script which I read, and I thought it was pretty good, and I said to John David that we ought to take this one, and that was Robocop, and that was a big one because no one really expected that to do as well as it did. It was a B-movie after all, or perceived to be a B-movie, and it just captured the culture at the time. And of course it was perfect fodder for a video game. The genre was perfect, the action element, and Paul Van Hoven, is that his name? I've forgotten now. He was a pretty good established director. So it was a bit of a punt, but it really changed the fortunes of Ocean in that it gave movie license games a lot more credibility, whereas before they were a little bit more cookie cutter.
Well, when you first started at Ocean, was it kind of one of your priorities to exercise a bit more quality control?
There was no specific agenda. What had happened was, when I was brought in, Ocean had recently got the rights to Knight Rider and Street Hawk, and they were being developed by some freelance companies. One of them was in Brighton, I recall. And I went to visit them, and they'd just been taking the money and hadn't really been doing anything with the game. And we had a deadline, and the marketing was all set to launch the game in 3 months' time or whatever it was. And there was no one overseeing it, and so I felt that the only way really to address this was to have a little bit more control, so bring more people in-house, because when I joined, I think there were about 10, maybe 12 people in-house at Ocean. So the first thing I wanted to do was expand that into a proper studio. And bear in mind, this was not done in those days. These days, you've got studios of hundreds and hundreds of people, but in those days it didn't exist. It was the start of the industry, and no one knew what to do. So we started a recruitment campaign, and we started getting some amazing talent in, some of whom are here today, and bringing the real AAA titles in-house, which allowed us, I use the control in the nicest sense of the word, but control in that we knew where it was at the time, we knew whether it was slipping behind or going to be on time. If it wasn't looking good, we could tweak a few graphics, and it worked.
What was the kind of culture like back then? Was it laid back place or kind of suits and?
It was insane. I mean, I was about 30, 29, 30. Most of the developers were in their teens, in their late teens. And as I say, all incredibly talented and enthusiastic and passionate. And so, but no, most of them had come straight from school or college or whatever and hadn't had a real job before. So you had the suits upstairs who were doing the sales and the marketing, and then you had the t-shirts downstairs in the dungeons, as we called them, and they were developing the games. And I was sort of in the middle. I was the interface between the two. So the suits would scream at me if something was late or something wasn't quite right or wasn't getting a good review. And the t-shirts would scream at me because I was screaming at them saying it's late and hasn't got a good review. So I was completely unpopular. But it was a great job. And it was the culture, how can I describe it? It was just raw. It was a pioneering time where the video games industry was just starting to exist. There was no precedent. You couldn't look at another company and say, that's what we want to be like. There were no examples to follow. We made it up as we went along, I guess. And some of it we did well, some of it we didn't do so well, but I think we did more well than we did badly. And it was wonderful. The atmosphere was great because everyone loved what they were doing. And no one really considered it to be something that was going to become part of the global culture. In those days, it was a fad. It was going to last 5 years, and then people would move on from video games to something else. And no one believed that in 30 years' time, we'd be coming to an event like this and seeing all that old stuff and so much affection being shown for it. I think that's taken us all by surprise, and if anyone says any different, I disagree. But no, we just didn't know. We were just doing something that we loved, and that showed, and it showed in the whole culture.
I mean, speaking about the culture at Ocean, I mean, did you kind of learn any lessons from Imagine Software? Because I know a lot of us probably saw that documentary that went out on TV, and there was lots of, extravagance, you could say, and like 18-year-olds driving like new Ferraris and that kind of thing. I mean, did you guys live it up quite a lot, or did you look at them and think, actually, we should rein it in a bit?
No, there was never that lack of control. I think Ocean was basically run by John Woods and David Ward, and they were businessmen. They actually just saw Ocean as a business. They weren't into games. I don't think they ever played a game in their lives. They saw it as a business opportunity, and so commercially they ran it as a company. Downstairs in the dungeons was a little bit different, a little less disciplined, but upstairs, as I say, you had the suit, you had professional salespeople, you had marketing teams, artwork, art teams, interfacing with the likes of Bob Wakelin, who's here today, to do the artwork, and created this great business. And I guess they actually created a template for the way business was run in the video games area. So it wasn't out of control, although I think David would have liked a Ferrari. Well, he had one actually. But, no, it was. I think everyone was doing pretty well. Everyone was pretty well paid because we wanted to keep the talent. So we needed to incentivize everyone. So everyone had a pretty good life.
What was your relationship with Commodore like, and how did you work with them?
It was very platonic. The relationship with Commodore, I mean, David Pleasance is here today, and I haven't seen him literally since those days, so it's going to be quite a reunion. We had a good relationship with Commodore. I was probably less involved because that was on the sales side. So obviously we were developing and creating and publishing some very, very popular games on a global scale. and Commodore were releasing new platforms, new hardware. So they wanted some way to push that hardware, and obviously a great way of doing that was bundling the machines with high-profile games. And of course, we did the Batman bundle for the Amiga, which was a phenomenal success. And part of that, I would like to think, was attributable to the game being pretty good.
Let's talk about licensing games, because I imagine it's quite an interesting process. Did you have much involvement with the movie studios? Did you kind of get scripts and ever visit the sets? And
all the time. I spent probably 2 weeks out of every 6 in Hollywood. Hey, had to buy sunglasses and everything, and that was an amazing experience. I was on the sets an awful lot, and I made friends with. I'll never forget. This sounds awful now, but one of the movie stars of the day was back then Alec Baldwin, who was married to Kim Basinger, and they were like the Brad and Angelina of the day. And he was doing The Shadow, being directed by Russell Mulcahy, who did Highlander. And we got the license for that. And I had quite a few meetings with them, and I got quite friendly with Alec Baldwin, of all people. And I remember inviting him to my house for dinner. I said, "Oh, you and Kim come round for dinner." And he, "Oh yeah, great. When we're in London next, we'll come over." He never did. We still got the plate out and the plate setting. But yeah, it was great. We'd go to the premieres, the premiere parties of the movies. I mean, it really was. It was a wonderful experience, and probably the best experience of all. I'm name dropping because you asked the question, but it's a nice little anecdote. Is meeting with Steven Spielberg on Jurassic Park, and he wanted a creative meeting. So I went into his office in Amblin Studios, which was on the Universal lot, and we had a great. And he was a lovely guy. He was like a kid. He was like a big kid, full of enthusiasm. Can we do this and can we do that? But the thing that I remember most about his office was. He had this cartoon, and the year that E.T. came out, Gandhi came out that same year, and he had this wonderful cartoon on the wall where there's a picture of Gandhi with a wheelbarrow full of Oscars, and next to him is a picture of E.T. with a wheelbarrow full of dollar bills. And it's just that's the thing I remember most about my meeting with Steve Spielberg. So no, the movie licensing side was great. The scripts kept coming in, and we'd visit the studios, we'd speak with the directors, and sometimes they'd have ideas of what they wanted the game to be, which we never delivered. We did our own thing. Of course, the problem was, we got these things, and the movie was coming out in 12 months, or even 6 months in some cases. So we had to design and develop and get the game out in time for the movie release, which was quite challenging, even more challenging these days. But as I say, we had, I can't stress this enough, we had exceptional talent in our studio. And I've been asked about this a number of times, and people have asked me about particular people. And I hate mentioning names because I don't want to miss anyone out. But I was blessed with some incredible people. And they were great, and they delivered.
When you got a movie license, would there be a lot of competition from the internal staff to actually get a job working on that?
Yeah, I think so. It wasn't quite that easy because obviously everyone was working on a project, and then when they finished, they'd look at the next one. So it was a question of timing, really. It's all very well someone saying, "I want to work on Jurassic Park," but if they're in the middle of the current project, then they wouldn't be able to, but maybe they'd be brought in afterwards to help the scheduling a little bit. But yeah, it wasn't entirely a democracy in that way, but obviously, from my perspective, if someone was genuinely interested in the property, then I think that would probably turn out to be a better game because they were passionate about it.
Were there ever any licenses you were offered that you turned down that went on to be like massive movies?
Mark Rain from Epic Games, he runs Epic Games. He keeps reminding me, and I swear to God I don't remember this, but he keeps reminding me that I turned down Wolfenstein. And he gloats about that all the time. I genuinely don't remember it. In terms of movies, no, there were some we lost which we wanted, like The Simpsons and The Turtles. The one movie license that sticks out in my mind that we shouldn't have got was Hudson Hawk, which was an absolute turkey. But if I tell you, that was the best script I'd ever read. And you had a great director, Shane Black was the writer, I forgot who the director was, but significant director. Bruce Willis was flavour of the month. Wonderful, wonderful script. It was funny, it was action-packed, it was great, and it was ideal for a video game. I thought, this is going to be huge. What had happened, apparently at the time, was Mr. Willis was such an ego that he'd come on set and he'd basically rewritten the script for that day. And so the script that we bought was very, very different to the script that ended up on screen, which is such a shame because it would have made a great movie, the original. So not a regret, but maybe a mistake.
There were such big kind of licensed games. Did you ever have any issues with submitting to them to the game company and them saying, "Oh"?
Yeah, there was Batman's ears were 1 pixel too long. I remember in John Rittman's Batman game, it was an isometric 3D game, and you popped along and you had to get your life recharged by taking pills. Batman does not take drugs, so we had to change that whole scenario. We were rushing to get The Simpsons. Acclaim got the license for The Simpsons, but we got the Spectrum and maybe C64 license, I think, for Europe. So we had to do certainly the Spectrum version, maybe the 64 as well. And we submitted the game, and we were doing it by the skin of our teeth. It had to be out for Christmas. In fact, I think it may have been part of the Commodore bundle at the time. So it really was a very, very strict deadline. And we got the thing back saying, everything is approved except Bart's blink is off-model. So, firstly, I didn't know what off-model meant, but it just meant it wasn't approved. Because The Simpsons, apparently, I learned this because of it, when you blink, your top eyelid goes down to the bottom, like most human beings. The Simpsons blink differently. They have a bottom and a top eyelid that meet in the middle. And our blinks were off-model because we did it as a human blink. It's probably that man over there, Mark Jones, he probably did. Blame him. That was a silly approval. But no, it was mostly likenesses that gave us problems with approvals.
Well, obviously you mentioned Batman, and I mean, in 1989 that got a massive reinvention with the Tim Burton movie. Before that, I mean, it was kind of remembered as a bit of a knack kind of 1960s show. Obviously, in that process of licensing the game, did you have any idea just how popular that was going to go on to be?
I don't think so. I think I would put it down to the whole point of Ocean, the philosophy of getting licenses, was not necessarily that we felt we had to make a game based on that property. It was a marketing thing. What we used to call the granny purchase, because Granny would go out at Christmas and want to buy her grandson a computer game. So she'd go to the shop and she'd see a vast array of cassettes or discs on the shelf and not have the faintest idea what to get him. But then she'd see Rambo and Top Gun and Batman, and she'd recognise those, so she'd buy them. So it was sounds very cynical, but it was purely a marketing exercise. So when we got Batman, it was a recognisable brand, but also I believe we all thought it would do incredibly well because the game was fantastic.
Did you ever kind of feel under pressure having to, put big financial commitments into these games and maybe have to change things?
I didn't buy any financial commitments. Yes, there was significant pressure. I mean, when we got to Jurassic Park, I think that was the first $1 million license. And this was back in the days when $1 million was a lot of money. It was the first $1 million license, and back in the late 80s, maybe 1990, that was a punt because there was never any guarantee that a movie was going to be successful. You had the credentials. You may have had Steven Spielberg directing what was the biggest book property of the decade, but there was no guarantee it was going to be a success. So, we ponied up $1 million and probably had to pay quite a large royalty as well. I don't remember. So there was a lot of pressure, and I remember wanting to do something groundbreaking for it. and the idea was to do a Doom-type game in 3D. But we just didn't have the time because, again, you know, we had a year or 6 months to do this game, and so you couldn't do anything too technologically advanced because it would take too long. So we had to make compromises, sadly.
You know, back in that kind of like 8-bit, 16-bit era, a lot of the games were platformers. Was it ever kind of a challenge to get the spirit of the original movie into a platformer?
Yeah, that was always. I mean, one way we addressed it, I think, was to do a number of mini games around the platformers. So, Batman the movie, for instance, the main substance of the game was a platform game, but then there'd be other intermediate levels that would give some variety and obviously lift it. And of course, the look of the game was very important, so we had to use reference from the movie to try and replicate the look and the feel of the movie within the game. We did the same with Robocop. We had some mini games in that, but platformers were tried and tested. Although personally, I believe the best platformer we made in-house was Addams Family. I just thought it was remarkable.
Well, speaking of The Simpsons as well, I mean, obviously that was just shown on Sky at the time, wasn't it? And then Bart Simpson became like the biggest star in the world, and that again showed quite a lot of foresight on Ocean's behalf. I mean, did you kind of have people keeping an eye on what was going to be the next trend? Were you always looking ahead?
Well, it's funny you mention The Simpsons because I remember I was out in the States the week the first Simpsons show was shown. It had been originally a little bit on the Tracy Ullman show, and it was the first week that it had its own episode of its own series. And I came back and I said, we've got to get this license. This is going to be huge. The Americans are going mad about it. We ought to get the license. And no one had heard about it in the UK. So there wasn't the attention paid to it. And about a year later, when it started to become truly phenomenal, Acclaim snapped it up already. So that's what we missed, actually.
I remember the first Simpsons at school. We had a VHS copy from America and a full assembly, and we all sat and watched it.
Comments like that made me feel so old.
Speaking of kind of other franchises, you worked on a game based on the Watchmen comics as well. How was that?
Yeah, I was into comics a lot, and the Watchmen had just started. In fact, it hadn't completed the series, and I loved it. So I got in touch. We were doing a little bit with DC because of the relationship with Batman, and I contacted DC. We went up to New York. Excuse me, and we were looking at a few licenses, including Lobo. And the Watchmen, I asked them if the Watchmen rights were available, and they said yes. So we negotiated those, and then I got in touch with Dave Gibbons, who was the artist on the Watchmen, which he co-created with Alan Moore. Excuse me. And he came to the studios, and that was in the old ones in Central Street. And we gave him his first computer, an Amiga, and he was actually going to do the graphics for the game as well, or help with the graphics. But I don't know what happened to it. For some reason, I think maybe it didn't become mainstream enough. This was obviously before the movie, a long time before the movie, and perhaps it didn't become mainstream enough. And although we were a big company, we did have limited resources, and we had to cherry pick what we'd apply those resources to. And so I don't think we ever actually prototyped the game.
Well, speaking of comics, I mean, you mentioned you were a comic fan then. Was there any other like superheroes or comics that you would have liked to make a game of?
I did want to do Lobo. I really wanted to make an adult version of Lobo, but I was voted down on that. Although I think we did play around with the idea at Ocean US at one point. But no, it was always very difficult. And this was the thing about, you know, you obviously think the big one always was Superman. He was the biggest superhero. But when you think about it, how can you make a game to control someone with all those different powers? He's got X-ray vision, heat vision, he can fly, he's got super strength, all the rest of it. And your controls will be all over the place. It will be an incredibly complicated game to develop. So we didn't really consider that. I don't remember. I'm sure there were. I think Green Lantern was one we tried to do as well, but I don't remember any others, I'm afraid.
So, why did you end up leaving Ocean in the end?
Pass. it was being bought by a French company, or there was rumours of it being bought by a French company, and I felt that the culture was going to change a little bit, and I wanted to move on. There was more to it.
For another day.
Yeah, another day.
So what would you say is kind of Ocean's legacy then?
It's a great legacy. I mean, the number of people here are testament to that legacy. I think we were there at the beginning. We did a number of things right. I think it was one of the few companies in the business that was operated as a business, and that contributed greatly to its success. I'd like to think that we set out a template for the way game, and not just us, but a lot of companies in those days, we set out a template for the way games would be developed from there on. There was no such thing as a producer when I started at Ocean. And then they started talking, that came from America, oh, you got a producer. And what the hell is a producer? We just got people looking after the games. That's what they had on their business card, person who looks after the games. So the titles became very Americanized, but the actual process, I think, is still largely kept to today. You schedule things, you design them out, you develop them, really simplifying it. But it's an inexact science, and this is the problem. With a movie, with a book, you have a very, very finite template to follow. If you're making a movie, you can have a shooting schedule, and weather permitting, you can pretty much stick to it. And edit it, you allow time for editing, and you'll end up with a pretty good experience, and time-wise, what that's going to be. With a video game, it's really difficult to explain to people back then, because most people didn't play games. And the movie people, you had to explain to them, this was not a linear experience. You were creating this infinite form of entertainment which could branch off in any way, and everything had to be tested for usability, interface, look, feel, and you wanted people to get their £5 worth when they bought their cassette. So it was a really, really complicated process, and therefore you needed, the people developing the games had to be gamers. They had to understand what they were playing and whether they enjoyed the experience themselves. And that has obviously continued to today. And as I say, Ocean weren't the only ones doing that. There was Mark Kells over there, System 3, and plenty of others, making amazing games. And all of those companies, I'd like to think, back in those days, formed the template for the way things are done today.
Well, talking of today, are you still in the games industry?
Yes, for my sins. Yes, I started a company called Scary Puppies, and I'm just helping out, trying to find new studios who have great talent and a great idea, and helping them raise money and find publishers. And I'm doing a little bit in China as well. I love the business. It's been the most incredible business, and it's changed a lot. It's very volatile, and it's very frustrating, but I can't think of anything better I'd like to do, and I do consider myself very lucky. Really.
What is it that excites you so much and keeps you passionate about the games industry?
Because it's constantly changing, and it's the innovation, because the true innovation is coming from the younger generation. You'll find that, I'm being cynical now, sound a bit like Simon Butler, that there's a lot of iteration in the AAA games. It's the very, very similar scenarios, because when you're looking at multi-million-dollar budgets, they've got to play it safe. So they don't want to take too much of a risk on massive innovation. With exceptions, there are exceptions, but by and large, games are changing very, very little. But the real changes are coming from the indies, are coming from the small bedroom programmers, reverted back to the 80s in that regard, who've got no overheads, and all they want to do is make great games. And there are some truly remarkable ideas coming from there.
Okay, well, I think that was a good point to leave it on, Gary. Thank you so much.